Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I kind of titled this the evolution of SRE, and I'm at PagerDuty right now. As Emma mentioned, I am a DevOps advocate here. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm LNXCHK. You can also email me. I'm mwalls@pagerduty.com. But kind of why I wanted to go into this in the context of cloud is that PagerDuty, while we were sort of always a cloud-based product, we are a SaaS provider in that way, and we run our stuff in public clouds. The practice of managing that cloud environment has changed significantly. So PagerDuty is 13-ish years old, and just in the past few years, the internal SRE practice has been growing and maturing and has changed significantly from where it was prior to that, based on our reliance on the cloud, the features that are available, and some of those things. So I wanted to share that with you. And I don't want to rehash all of SRE. Hopefully you're kind of familiar with that term. If you're not, the Google books that came out in like 2016 are a really great place to get started there. So I just want to call out like some of the things that serve as our guiding principles for SRE and some of our goals, right? The thing most developers see most obviously is, the breaking down of organizational silos. We have fewer requests that end up being behind an anonymous ticket queue, and more components end up being self-serve, especially in the cloud, where we end up like wrapping a lot of things around infrastructure as code and giving those things to the application teams as part of sort of a shared ownership model, so that as they're building new features and new services, they are able to put those things into production. And that really sets the stage for recognizing that failure is going to happen. Like Jeremy totally went into all that stuff. It's awesome. One team isn't going to be blaming another for not running their software correctly. If you throw it over the wall to operations, say good luck. They didn't write it. They don't know how it's supposed to perform. In this case, everyone is responsible, and everyone is going to be sharing in working on the reliability of the services and repairing them when something goes wrong. And that does mean for us that our application engineers have on-call schedules. And when we talk about SRE practice with our customers, that's one of the things that we get to talk about. We have a bit of a vested interest. We would love to have all of your folks on call, but at the same time, like that responsibility, that reliability, and getting all of your applications up and running as fast as possible if there's an incident is all part of that, as well as having the knowledge about how your application is going to perform when it gets to your production environment. Then you get to see where it's going to go, and you can set your service level indicators. You can set your service level objectives, and then use those in your feedback loop to improve your work. So we know that then we are, focusing on ways to improve our reliability over time. We're focusing on how that impacts our development processes. We're not setting up huge deploys that take multiple teams, multiple days to coordinate. We're making regular, small, incremental changes, which improves the overall stability of the system. And Cody mentioned that earlier, going from just 3 or 4 maybe things a day to having a lot of changes sort of all the time. So it becomes muscle memory. It becomes something that is expected rather than something that is to be feared, right? And it can seem counterintuitive. Like we definitely still have the conversation with some folks. It's like, unless you've ever had to like sit through a weeks-long failure because a launch went badly, and then you discover that like the component that isn't being behave was written by someone who left the company 4 months ago, and like the entire memory of that development process has left. So there's a lot to be said with getting things through your pipelines as fast as possible. And that leads into also reducing the cost of failure, because you can just fix things, right? You get that practice, so you're less afraid of it. So as our teams find bumps in the road that cause us issues or affect the reliability of the system, and they definitely happen, right? We can automate them. We have an automation practice that, we are trying to get through things that are the regular components that we're doing all the time, the undifferentiated heavy lifting, those kinds of things that just have to get done. That's like hygiene, like you have to brush your teeth, right? That kind of work that has to get going. So automation helps us build up all the self-service tools and enablement that we give to the application teams. And all that, again, has evolved over time as our platforms have gotten more complicated and the requirements of our dev teams have gotten more complicated. And part of that is because the dev environment's crazy, right? Like looking at the number of tools that we use, like I open up my Okta panel, I'm like, I don't even know what half of this stuff is or what it does, but there's a whole lot of it there. And I don't work on direct application development. So like what everybody else is doing is kind of crazy, right? So we know that, after the Google SRE book came out in 2016, there's this big snowball effect. People started rethinking their operations practices and sort of refocusing on, just how efficient and effective can you be, revisiting their CI/CD tools and putting things together in more efficient ways. So when we look across that modern landscape of all this development tooling, like the options are, like, honestly, they're awe-inspiring, right? Like I've been in the industry a number of years, and like from where I started from to where we are now is kind of incredible. It can be intimidating, right? Especially if you're trying to pick a new solution for something. And honestly, it can be exhausting for teams to try and figure out what the best options are for their particular pipeline, right? It's way too much for a single developer to master all the intricacies of every potential tool that they might need to have in their toolbox. So they might pick a handful of things that are close enough, and that's fine. SRE teams then help become, sort of trusted advisors and consultants to help teams use all these dev tools more effectively. And that's been an expansion of our SRE practice over the past several years, just sort of like being more efficient in the entire workflow as things are headed into the cloud at a much faster pace. So acquiring all this expertise really needs everyone to be, it's effective in any one tool. It takes time, and that time takes away from learning the other stuff that you might have going on, right? So it's easy to get bogged down in a yak shave of tool selection, especially if you're, looking out across all the potential options. So for some SRE teams that we talk to, they're taking sort of a fractional approach, dividing up work streams and teams and creating new competencies to deal with complexity and reducing duplication of work. And this starts to put stress on the SRE principles, particularly around what we call paving the road. So this is the kind of things that sort of keep our SRE teams aligned up. So over the past couple of years, we started out with one main SRE team, which is kind of like a catch-all for all the things that folks needed from the application teams to push their stuff into prod. And over time, as the organization got bigger and the environments got more complex, and we had some legacy stuff, like how do you know when you get old enough to call it legacy, right? That becomes a decision point too. And now we have 3 separate SRE teams, as well as a couple principal SREs who are there to kind of have guidance and things like that. So the organization has grown and matured that way. So we derived our principles, and our teams help keep all that stuff aligned. So our reliance is completely on cloud platforms, both for our infrastructure. We have a lot of services that we actually buy from other vendors, right? I'm sure you do too. And it's really only made these things more important. Last year, we expanded our service locations to the EU. So that also created a large lift for retooling our SRE tools and sort of refocusing on what the important parts were as we were migrating those components internationally, and which parts of the cloud were supported and where things needed to go and all that stuff. So as the engineering team has grown, having safe defaults for everyone has really become a main priority. But the product teams need flexibility. They want to create new features and products. Those components are going to be integrated with existing services, and our SRE teams have created what they call the paved road or golden path. And it's the fastest way to get new services and features into production, and to take that path and not go off on side quests and not want special exceptions and not want deviations. You take the supported tools, the supported frameworks, and off you go. And this supports good security practice and good audit practice. And for folks who need certifications and different for FedRAMP or something like that, it applies to all of those kinds of things too. So there's a lot of stuff that falls out kind of naturally from having these more stringent operational standards that SRE sets that helps you maintain what you're doing in the cloud. We've experimented with a number of different SRE models. We currently use a combination of all of them, depending on what the project is and what the project looks like. We might have some SREs who work directly with one team. We might have folks that are more specialized, but it's an evolution as your process matures, you find more things that you need to be doing. And another place that's kind of interesting to look at this is a book called Team Topologies. This came out 2019 by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pais. And they kind of break it down in a couple of different teams. And we found that, your stream-aligned team is sort of cradle to grave. They're going to do the you built it, you run it kind of model, and everybody is there the whole time. And then there's an enablement team, which is kind of like consultants, and they're there to help you out. They pave that road, give you that sort of golden path. They call it the next one the complicated subsystem team. They're the folks that have significant technical expertise in something. Maybe you've got you still got some mainframes or something else. Your AI models or something that needs that there is super interesting as well. And then finally, platform team is sort of internal service providers. And we find these two, enabling and platform provider, work really well for the way our organization maintains our cloud presence, right? We have folks who help set our reliability patterns, our expectations. They meet with engineering teams on a consulting basis to help them sort of put things together. And finally, we have a team that works more as a platform provider and helps, put together the main components for infrastructure as code and other parts of our cloud presence. So as we've built up the practice, we've built, best practices, we've built expertise around the cloud that we've chosen to use, and the other components that we pull in from it. There's also a vendor relationship management that comes in with this, which is kind of interesting for folks who are looking to leverage cloud for the first time, as we come in it from a sort of incident response process. What we're finding with some of our customers is that if the cloud provider is having some issues, which happens, right? Jeremy mentioned that. You want someone on your team to sort of be the watcher of that and watching the upstream vendor for notifications, for updates, for impacts, for TTR, right? On all of those kinds of things. And that becomes another function of that operational team as we move into the cloud, right? So what we've also seen is more of a breakdown of expertise. It starts out sort of counterintuitive. It's more of a classic operations model where you had the network operations team and storage operations team and those kinds of folks. And now we sort of have an SRE team, but it's because of the complexity and what we're finding, especially even just using one cloud, is that we need a lot of expertise to get the best and most efficient use out of that. And we see more specialization across our teams and across some of our customer teams as they are looking at making the best use of the cloud providers that they've chosen to use. So things to keep in mind, right? Cloud is really it's a primary enabler. It's why we're actually able to do what we do, right? The flexibility, the efficiency, the ability to go where we need to go is super important for us. It also adds that complexity because we're not maintaining or adding the features ourselves, right? There's an aspect of watching what the vendor is doing and keeping updated with the things that they're doing. Then focusing on reliability and production performance is super important in a cloud environment, and maintaining where you're going to put your components. As Jeremy mentioned earlier, like, does everything have to be in US East 1? That's a big question to have with your team, right? And then our SRE teams can provide general knowledge as well as specialized recommendations and pave that road for everyone else so that your application engineers are building the things your customers want and not fiddling around with building container images and stuff like that. So we're doing some other talks and research on this. We'd love to hear from you if you've got thoughts, opinions, or practice that you've gone through. So thanks for joining today.